Here's something you don't see often, a Califone Model 6A transcription player, also known as a record player. And best I can tell from date codes, this is from 1947, late 47, possibly early 48. Califone was founded in 47, so this is one of their earlier offerings. This machine plays 33 and 78 RPM records. However, back then, 33 RPM records were the big 16-inch transcription records for the most part, and they had a groove very similar to that of a 78, so this is really not designed to play micro groove LPs. Newcomb quality it's not. It's rather cheaply made, but it is an early example of something that Califone made, and it's not something you see every day, so I think it's worth restoring. In fact, the case to this thing feels like it's made out of some type of heavy molded cardboard. I don't know. It's not plastic, and it's certainly not metal, so. And the way you change the speed on this is lift the turntable mat up, and I think there's the motor capstan, you have to pull it up for 33 or push it down for 78. I'll have to look at that closer. But yeah, let's get this thing torn apart and get it working again. Now, I've already cut off the old rotten power cord and speaker cable right here, so that will obviously have to be replaced. And here's the Tonearm in the 16-inch position. You just simply move the rear Tonearm mounting bracket to this position and move the armrest out here, and that will allow a 16-inch disc to be placed on the turntable. Here's the underside with the bottom cover removed. The cover just snaps into place. We have a nice size motor. A little plain Jane 3-tube amplifier. Shouldn't be too hard to get this thing going again. And here's the Amplifier Chassis. Very compact construction here. I see 4 standard paper capacitors and what looks like a mica bomb capacitor down in there. Also known as the leaky mica mold capacitors that always need to be replaced. So hopefully all this amp will need is just basic routine service, and it'll be good to go. Just to make things easier to service, I just went ahead and unwired the amplifier from the rest of the record player. The audio output transformer still remains inside of the case, but we can worry about that later. Since this is such a compact unit, I want to make it as easy as possible for me to get to everything and service it, so taking it out of the case was the easiest way to accomplish that. Okay, that takes care of all of the paper capacitors. You can see the pile of them right there. You can also see the chassis just got a lot more roomy. It's amazing what small parts can do, modern small components. Now, the next thing is to replace this big electrolytic can capacitor. I'll probably leave the original one in place, but have it electrically disconnected and mount smaller, more modern capacitors under the chassis here. Just for the heck of it, we're testing this electrolytic capacitor. It's a dual section, one section 50 microfarad, the second section 30 microfarad. And the 50 microfarad is reading 6.7 microfarad, so that section's basically dried up. And the 30 microfarad is reading 6, so that section too is basically toast. And these multi-section can capacitors have a common ground, so when you replace one with individual components, you simply just tie the negative leads of the capacitors together, in this case 2 capacitors, and the negative lead is indicated by the band here. You don't want to wire an electrolytic capacitor in backwards or you'll have some unpleasant excitement on your hands, and you can see how much smaller these 2 modern capacitors are in comparison to the original. Okay, that concludes the capacitor replacement stage of this amplifier repair. Everything else on the chassis seems to be good, so put everything back together and the amplifier should work. And then once we confirm that the amp indeed works, then we'll move on to the drive mechanism. In testing our tubes, the 50B5 audio output tube has a short. I may not have a 50B5 here. If not, I'll just rewire the socket for a 50C5. Okay, I just tested the continuity of the output transformer windings, and they seem okay. I tested the motor winding. It seems okay. So I think pretty much all that's left to do with the amp is replace the 50B5 tube and replace the power and speaker cables. Well, I'm too lazy to go to the basement where the tubes are located to see if I have a 50B5, so I'll now tear the drive mechanism apart and do what needs to be done to get it running smoothly again. And now we need to remove this clip to remove the turntable platter, which is basically standard procedure for all of these record players. And I'm really surprised this rubber mat is in such good shape. Usually these mats have long dry rotted by now. And no surprise, the motor mounting grommets are shot, so like we did on the Belmont record player, I'm just going to simply dismount this whole drive mechanism from the body of the record player. That'll make it easier for me to service it, and there'll be less risk to me possibly damaging this record player cabinet. And as you can see, we have some more rubber grommets here that isolate the entire drive assembly from the cabinet. I can just use some modern rubber grommets to replace those. It won't be no problem. And just like on the Belmont record player, this idler wheel has a notch in it from where it's been sitting in gear for probably 50 years without being used, so we will have to have this wheel rebuilt. But for today, we should be able to get it working good enough for testing purposes. Okay, we now have the idler wheel removed. We'll next remove these 3 screws here so we can drop the motor, and then we'll clean up the main drive assembly, replace the rubber grommets, and then that portion should be taken care of. You want to be careful when removing this particular motor mounting screw because it also secures a bracket that holds this spring in place. So we'll probably want to just remove this spring and get it out of the way so we don't accidentally lose it. Okay, the mechanism is basically disabled for cleaning and re-lubricating, and you can see all the gunk that's on this slide mechanism here. It's a mixture of old dried up lubricant and 60 plus years of dirt and gunk. Okay, we now have our slide nice and clean and smooth. We'll do the same thing to the rest of the mechanism. And for cleaning, we use either rubbing alcohol or this contact cleaner here. You want to get everything nice and clean so it'll be ready for the non-vaginal white lithium grease. Okay, I just re-lubricated the center spindle bearing, and that's accomplished by carefully removing this clip. It's a little bit tricky to get off, and you want to be careful. However, I will say it's easier to put the clip back on than it is to get it off. But anyway, you just clean the spindle and the bearing with contact cleaner via use of a Q-tip and a paper towel, and then you just coat everything good with the white lithium grease, as well as a drop or two of zoom spout applied on top of the grease. Put everything back in together, put the clip back on, and it now turns very freely and is silent now. We want these drive mechanisms to be as silent as possible. And on this slide pen, you just want to, after you clean it good, apply some white lithium grease to the points that actually slide, and that way it will travel smoothly. Okay, we have our slide back in position. It's held in place by two nuts and that brass washer. You don't want to over tighten those nuts because the slide needs to be able to move freely. So what I have is the nuts tightened just enough for the slide to move as it should. And just as a little bit of added security, I put a drop of super glue on the nuts to hold them in place. And as you can see, everything's moving as freely as it should. Now I'll take the motor apart and oil it, even though it currently runs pretty good. But something that's 60 plus years old needs to be taken apart and re-oiled. Here's the bottom bearing assembly for the motor. You can see that black wicking material there. We need to saturate that real good with zoom spout, as well as clean out the bearing. I'll probably put just one drop down inside of the bearing just for good measure. And yeah, this wick is pretty much soaking the oil up as fast as I'm applying it, so that indicates that wick is pretty much bone dry. I re-lubricated the top bearing just as I did the bottom one. Put it all back together and it's running very nicely now. Of course, that noise it's making is because it's resting on my workbench. Nice spin down time. Okay, here it is reassembled, and as you can see, the wheel is turning. Now, the way they instruct you to run this at 78 RPM speed is to hold the wheel back with one hand and then lift the motor capstan up with the other. Obviously, that was a quick and cheap way to accomplish 33 and 78 RPM out of a mechanism that was formerly used in 78 RPM units. So to switch it to 78, you just grab this brass piece on the capstan and pull it straight up. And that changes it to 78 RPM. Which, in all honesty, will probably be the speed that I use the most on this record player. Now, this idler wheel will have to be rebuilt. It's kind of glazed and hardened, and even the rubber renew didn't help it much, but it should still run the platter. The main disadvantage to this type of speed change method is that you have to touch the idler wheel and the motor shaft with your hands, which could very easily deposit oil and dirt and other unwanted deposits on the idler wheel and the motor shaft, which can cause turntable slippage and uneven speed. So yeah, like I said, this was a quick and cheap way to get two speeds out of a mechanism that was originally used on a single speed turntable. Okay, I couldn't find a Type 50 B5 output tube in my stock, or admittedly I was a little bit too lazy to dig through all of the tube caddies to try to find one. And that laziness was motivated by the fact that the 50 B5 was not around very long before it was replaced with the more reliable 50 C5. It was only used in 30 million different radios and record players, so it's a common tube. However, a 50 C5 is not a direct plug-in replacement. You have to make some wiring changes to the socket. In this case, the cathode pin, the plate pin, and the control grid pin had to be moved to other locations from where the 50 B5 locations were. And we got our information as to what goes where from this GE tube manual here. So now, instead of this using a 50B5, it uses a Type 50C5. And I happen to have two of those right here. They're used, but they check okay on the tube tester. In fact, in the 25 plus years that I've been doing this, I can probably count on one hand the number of 50B5s that I've ran into in various pieces of equipment. So that just tells you it's not a very common tube. Well, I have it back together, and much to my surprise, this old crystal cartridge still has a fair amount of output. In the 25 years that I've been doing this, I can probably count on one hand, or actually a couple of fingers, the times I've seen that happen. Well, it's producing output, but you know, I can tell it is a little distorted. Okay, this will blow your doors in. This thing tracks at 30 grams, which is really no surprise for a 78 RPM style cartridge. Now, I can install a more modern cartridge and get the weight down, and if the lighter weight cartridge still doesn't bring it down enough, there's a spring in the back of the Tonearm I can adjust to get it down further. In fact, I have a fan steel P51/2, and the /2 version means that it contains an all-speed needle that will play LPs and 45s, although I wouldn't recommend it for good LPs that you want to keep in good shape. This particular player will be something that I likely only play 78s and transcriptions on. And if I'm not mistaken, the big 16-inch transcriptions are played with a 2.5 mil stylus, and the standard 78s for consumer use are played with a 3 mil stylus. So the 2 mil stylus should be a good compromise for both types of records. Actually, when the 2 mil stylus was introduced back in the early 50s, the standard groove for a mono micro groove record was 1 mil, and the 78s were 3 mil, so they came out with a 2 mil stylus, which fell within the halfway point that was supposed to be a compromise. And here's the original cartridge, and that's static. Looks like it's date coded July of 46. Still has some output, so you can mark that one down in the books. But in this Mississippi humidity, it probably won't have output for very long, so I think I'll just wait on the more modern cartridge to come in, and that will be an all-around improvement for this. And I'll just say a word or two about this Tonearm. This is a static 16-inch transcription style Tonearm. Very popular. It was used from, well, this one record player was made in 47, so it was obviously used that far back. And I've seen the same Tonearm used on some Newcomb and Audiotronics transcription players made as recent as the late 1960s, so you figure this particular Tonearm was in use for 20 years. In fact, some of them were fitted with a GE variable reluctance magnetic cartridge, so these Tonearms are fairly versatile as far as what kind of cartridge you can install in them, because they have that spring back here that you can adjust to get the tracking weight right. Okay, there's been a slight change of plan. I was digging around and I found an old static 89T cartridge holder that I acquired from somewhere, and I just happened to have a brand new 89T cartridge. So I just replaced the original cartridge with the standard flip type 89T classroom record player cartridge, and I adjusted the spring at the rear of the Tonearm to get the tracking pressure right. So now we have a flip style cartridge, one side for LP, one side for 78 and 16-inch transcriptions. that's it with an LP. Now for a 78, so we need to change over to 78 RPM. First we stop the motor, and we lift the turntable mat and align the hole to where I can get to the motor capstan. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. Hold the wheel back, pull this brass collar all the way up as far as it'll go. Now it's in the 78 RPM position, and we flip our cartridge over to the 78 side. Okay, there we are with a 78. I guess the only thing left to do is replace that idler wheel. I can definitely tell the wow and flutter here. Okay, here's one of the big 16-inch transcription records. And as you can see, it fits on the turntable nicely. These were primarily used by radio stations, but there was also some instances where they were used for educational purposes. You could pretty much have whatever you wanted recorded on one of these. Back in the late 90s, I met an elderly lady whose husband was a minister during the 40s and 50s, and all of his sermons were recorded on these big 16-inch records. I think they were aluminum-based with some kind of coating on them, and they were cut at a local radio station. Back then, it was not uncommon for radio stations to have their own in-house record-cutting facilities. I think he passed away during the 70s, so it had been at least that long since she'd heard his voice. And she had a Califone player that was very similar to this one, only hers was way past going. Well, I ended up finding her an old Gerard 301 turntable that had been set up to play these big discs, and I gave that to her. That was before I knew that those Gerards were worth so much money, but, it's all good. Everything's not about money, and that turntable allowed her to hear her husband's voice that she probably hadn't heard in ages, so, that's all fine and good. That was really more important than me making $1. I kept in touch with that lady for several years, and then I don't know whether she passed away or had to be put in a nursing home. I noticed her name is not in the phone book anymore, and I've asked around and nobody seems to know anything. I'm just afraid that she might have passed away and whoever was in charge of her stuff couldn't have cared a rat's behind about the old records and whatnot and tossed them all to the street. I just hope that whoever was in charge of her stuff cared enough to preserve those records. But okay, here's one of the radio station transcription records. This is some kind of veterans program.
David in the orchestra on Here's to Veterans, the best in music for all you ex-servicemen and women and your folks everywhere. Especially transcribed for you by the Veterans Administration in cooperation with the American Federation of Musicians. Yes, this is Russ David and the gang with a quarter hour tailored especially for you ex-GIs and your families. I hope you enjoy our music and that you invite us back again. Say, later on in the show, I have a special message for you veterans direct from the Veterans Administration in Washington. But first, a tune that really fits for an opener. A Russ David special, Rockin' in Rhythm.
Okay, there you go. That's about all I've got for this record player. I just need to do the final stage of reassembly and have the idler wheel rebuilt, and it should be good to go again. Okay, there you go. Thanks for watching, and more to come later. I'll probably do another demo once I get the wheel rebuilt. Okay, not quite done yet. I discovered that on some 78s with the 89T cartridge that I had installed, that it liked to skip like crazy, and I think that's mostly due to all of the vibration that is being picked up by the Tonearm, causing the needle to skip. Now, I think most of that vibration is due to the idler wheel that needs to be rebuilt, and also the rubber motor mounts. There's actually two sets of motor mounts in this unit. One set mounts the motor to the drive mechanism, which I replaced. The other rubber washers isolate the entire drive mechanism from this chassis here. Well, those washers are pretty much rotten, and I had to reuse them because I didn't have anything else. So I think after I have the idler wheel rebuilt and replace those washers with some nice rubbery parts instead of old hardened remains, that this thing might be a little bit less noisy and vibrate less. So what I ended up doing was reinstalling the original crystal cartridge. Yes, take a good look. You don't see many of these as static cartridges that are still good, and this appears to be the original. I found out the cause of the distortion and the intermittent dropout was due to dirty contacts on the cartridge. I cleaned those and everything seems to be okay. It doesn't skip now, or at least it doesn't skip much, but I can definitely tell the inconsistency in speed here.
Your cheating heart will make you weep.
Yeah, the fidelity is not bad at all for such a cheap record player and a older crystal cartridge like this. Parts of me would like to go back to using a decent lower tracking cartridge like what I had in here, but that may not be possible. We'll just have to see how it goes after I quieten things down a bit. But part of me would like to just leave this cartridge in here and see how long it lasts. I mean, it's so rare that you find one of these cartridges that's still good, but like I said earlier, it may not last long in this Mississippi humidity. And here's a 16-inch transcription with the original cartridge. With this type of cartridge, you should not try to play a standard stereo microgroove LP, or actually you really shouldn't try to play any microgroove LP at all. But with a stereo record, these type of cartridges have no vertical compliance. And with stereo, you need good horizontal and vertical compliance of the stylus, and this has basically no vertical compliance. Now don't worry, this is a trashed record, and I wouldn't do this to one that was good, but you can hear what happened.
You got to rock and roll.
But it actually plays, but it doesn't sound that great, and you can tell it. And it's real easy for this thing to skip. But wouldn't take long for that to ruin a stereo groove. Now here we are with a microgroove mono record from the mid-50s. And as you can hear, it does much better, but this is still not something I would recommend for a record that you care about, or at least a microgroove record. 78s and transcriptions are fair game, but So with all that said, I think I'll leave you for now with this record player. I'll send the idler wheel off to Ed Crockett of Vintage Electronics, and it usually takes around 30 days turnaround to have these older wheels rebuilt. So when I get the wheel back and replace those rubber mounting washers, I'll do a follow-up video and we'll see how this thing performs. But for right now, so long and more to come later.
I don't want no part of your crazy, crazy heart. I just received your letter. You said it would be better if I would forget I ever met you.